So now I would like to introduce John Preisner and Joyce Shadiak. John is a warehouse worker and anti-war activist. He recently traveled to China and North Korea on a peace delegation and has been organizing against war in the United States. Joyce is a Lebanese American and a longtime anti-war activist. She recently attended and presented at a conference in Beirut on the 100th anniversary of the Balfour Declaration. So first we will hear from John. Let's welcome John.
Sweet. So I'll just get right into it. So we don't have a lot of time. The threat of war against Korea is continuing to grow under the Trump administration. And most of what we see from the state and from the mainstream media is the tests that are supposed to be so provocative from North Korea. So the latest test was this Tuesday, the 28th, which is actually a significant development because it appears now that DPRK or North Korea has the ability to hit any location in the United States with a nuclear weapon. And they're declaring themselves as a nuclear power now. And the U.S. media and the state, again, is treating this as like an act of aggression, that they're a rogue state and they're trying to conquer the rest of the peninsula, and they're threatening the U.S. and irrational and can't be trusted with this. And Trump said, actually in sort of a calmer rhetoric than what he's been saying previously, he said, "We will take care of it," somewhat ominously. But this comes after saying he will totally destroy North Korea at the UN. And then after this test, Nikki Haley went on to also say they would totally destroy it. And McMaster and Lindsey Graham and that faction of the ruling class right now that really does feel that war is inevitable and is pushing for it. So the danger is really real. There are a lot of people who know that it would be create too much instability, but the danger is always there. It's easy to go up the escalation ladder of war, it's hard to go down. But who's the real aggressor, right? They make it seem like North Korea is always provoking us, but in reality, it's the U.S. that is provoking North Korea, of course. And actually, in this specific incident with this specific test, after the last test, Joseph Yun, the top U.S. State Department official on North Korean policy, said if North Korea stopped missile tests for 60 days, it would show the restraint and the U.S. would restart direct negotiations. So the last missile test was on September 15th, beyond 60 days, and no diplomatic engagement ensued. Instead, the U.S. sent B-1 bombers and continued with military drills and sent 3 aircraft carriers to the peninsula and creating more of a threat. And actually tomorrow, another set of drills is going to start with about 12,000 U.S. troops. The DPRK has a potent conventional military deterrent, but it's still dwarfed by the U.S., right? The U.S. is the largest military, economic, and political power in the history of this planet, has strategically located all around the planet. The U.S. has everything is in range of U.S. nukes. They have nuclear submarines located secretly everywhere. We have enough nukes to end life on Earth as we know it. The DPRK and North Korea knows that any first strike against the U.S. would be suicide, right? And the military drills are not just a menacing reminder or threat to repeat the Korean War, but it also poses an actual strategic threat, because at any point this military exercise could turn into a real invasion with these real material military forces that are at their border. And Koreans, and the exercises are extremely provocative, flyovers of bombers, decapitation strikes, even now including nuclear first strike drills, and just a massive amount of resources. But Koreans, people in DPRK have living memory of the Korean War. So these are very real. These are not these war games are not games, so take them very seriously. And that's the thing. They're always trying to say that North Korea is acting irrationally, when really they're creating this deterrent is actually very rational and has allowed them to not be invaded. And actually direct negotiations have worked. during the Clinton administration. Direct negotiations with North Korea led to them freezing their nuclear program. Then when Bush came in and declared them as part of the Axis of Evil with Iraq, and then invaded and destroyed Iraq, they backed out of the deal because they realized that they couldn't trust us, that they needed to build an actual deterrent and work towards getting nuclear power. So real quickly, I'll just kind of cover the Korean War a little bit. Sounds referencing it, just give a little bit of background. So to really understand the Korean War, you need to understand the colonialization period. Before that, Korea was colonized by Japan unofficially from 1905, officially in 1910 to 1945. It was extremely brutal occupation against which there was a national liberation movement. Eventually it succeeded, and Japan was defeated as Japan was defeated in World War II. But a US precondition for Japanese surrender was that Japanese colonial occupation troops that were occupying Korea had to keep their positions that were remaining in South Korea until US troops could relieve them, effectively replacing the Japanese occupation with the US occupation. So it became like a North and South Vietnam scenario where you had the occupation forces. So eventually war broke out. The US claims that the North invaded the South, but really it was an ongoing conflict. And even the UN authorized the war. The US carried out really a campaign of genocide against the Korean people, bombing indiscriminately. Within the first year, the most common complaint from pilots was there's nothing left to bomb. They bombed for 2 more years. 20% of the population was killed or more. Really the like untold damage to society was completely shredded. So even though the war succeeded in creating a lot of human suffering, they were unable to defeat Korea, so were forced to sign an armistice. So while this stopped the active military combat, it's not a peace treaty. So while the mainstream media never talks about this, we are still officially at war with North Korea. So that's how we got to the borders we have today. So while North Korea is demonized and portrayed as a brainwashed police state, although that's, I didn't experience that when I visited there, it did not seem like that. Many people who visit will tell you the same thing. There's a lot of lies and propaganda framing it, DPRK. They also portray South Korea as being like the example of like success of Western style capitalist democracy. When really it's important to point out that South Korea up until recently was an actual military dictatorship. And actually, until about the 80s when actual armed uprisings against like brutal crackdowns on the people on peaceful demonstrations led to democratization. But there's still colonial hangovers, still things like a national security law where anyone who's suspected of being part of anti-government activities can be detained, without trial and stuff like that. So there's still a very important struggle going on within South Korea, and they recently, Koreans took the streets in the millions for months on end to oust their extremely pro-US President Park Geun-hye, because ultimately Korea is one, and Korea does not want to be occupied by the US. No one wants to be occupied by US troops. So they were able to successfully oust Park Geun-hye, although the new president, Moon Jae-in, seems to not really be fulfilling the goals of the movement to put him in, but that's like kind of getting a little into it. So, and the struggle is still ongoing also with THAAD. So Moon Jae-in, the replacement of Park Geun-hye was supposed to oppose a THAAD, but he's under so much pressure from the US that he's actually increased the number of THAAD launchers. THAAD is supposedly a missile defense system, which is actually a very provocative move against China because its range is so far into China's territory. It's supposed to be a defense supposedly against North Korea, when really it's only inflaming tensions. And the villagers don't want military bases in their town. There's 80 US military bases in South Korea. They have increased pollution and crime from the soldiers that live there. So the US occupation is really resented. So what can we do? We need to stand in solidarity with this, the international movement against US militarism and occupation. There's a lot of different ways to do that depending on where you are But the advantage of having the People's Congress of Resistance is that we're able to share our skills with each other and also lift each other up. If you guys are organizing, whether it's a protest or a forum or a class or a speak out, we can share it through People's Congress Media. And we also have a lot of resources, and people like myself or other people who have firsthand experiences can Skype in to any meetings that you have. And I just wanted to give a shout out to Medea Benjamin to you real quick, who was a convener of the People's Congress and actually was in and did a walk across the DMZ from North Korea to South Korea across the border, Women Cross the DMZ event, which is really excellent. So, it's really important. It's not an issue that hasn't really been given a lot of light, but it's so critical. War with Korea, that threat is very real, and it would be so devastating. Tens of thousands, if not millions of people will die, and the occupation just needs to end because nobody should be occupied by U.S. troops. But that's all about, I think, all I have right now. Hopefully I didn't go too far over time.